Hello, I'm Wendy. Today we're looking at salt effects and Christmas card ideas. It's a watercolour tutorial. A few days ago I was looking at some work that I did, a couple of years ago now. I was looking at the effect of salt in watercolour and working out some ideas for doing some trees with these snow effects on them. Clearly some of them aren't finished and clearly some of them are working better than others. But as you'll see through this video, even if you think the salt effects are maybe a little bit over the top sometimes, you can still do something with these pictures. You can see from this that the one I did, it was looking quite similar to some of the others, but by putting the trunk in, some branches and a little fence there, it really is quite effective. And with an aperture card around it, I think it would make quite a nice Christmas card, don't you? So what I'm intending to do in this video then is to do something along these lines. You'll never be able to get the same picture as before, but I'm going to use the techniques that I used and we'll see how we get on. Just a quick look at using different sized apertures around the tree here. This is a different card. And here I think this works better. You're seeing more of the snowy effect here with the bigger aperture. Links to the aperture cards are given in the description box below. And for those people who are having trouble, particularly people in the States, I think, in finding these aperture cards, what you can do, of course, is just cut out the area that you want and just stick it onto a regular card. I do have links to some nice ones from Amazon in the description box below, but they are easy to come by. I drew a simple little tree picture. Do take care not to make it too lollipop shaped, too round. It is a trap we all fall into. And you can see the dimensions here. And the paper I was using was Saunders Waterford, not surface, £140. The colours I used were light red and Prussian blue. These colours work well together. They're opposite each other on the colour wheel and they give you some nice neutrals. I think I've got a nice sort of neutral grey for the colour of the tree. I'll suggest some more colour combinations towards the end of the video. And also, I think it's important to make a note of what paper you're using. I found different brands of paper can give quite different results when you're doing this wet into wet work with the salt techniques. So if you find you're having more problems than you think you should, then try switching paper. Try a different brand. The Saunders Waterford that I'm using at the moment does work really well. So that's one brand you can try, as I said, if you are struggling. I started by making two very dilute washes of the light red and the Prussian blue. You can see the consistency here. And a stronger neutral for the tree, using quite a thick mix here. And it's always a good idea to test your mix out on a scrap of paper. You can add more red if you wanted it a little bit warmer. It does need to be considerably thicker than the first two washes that you made. It can be a good idea to put that brush to one side because it contains an awful lot of that thick mix and you're going to lose a lot of it if you start washing that brush out. Following on from that, I've got everything ready, and then after a little bit of experimentation I decided that it's best to damp that paper down to the fence line, just to the base of the tree, with some water. Not so that it's absolutely running, but just so that you've damped it, and then you can drop in some of this colour that you've mixed up and it will flow. So the colours, I call it dropping in because I'm not really brushing the paint a lot, I'm just letting the colours merge, as you can see. They're quite soft and they're merging quite well here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that dark mix, or paint that dark mix if you like, into the area where the tree is. This is called painting wet into wet. Now you could let that background dry if you wanted and then paint the tree onto the dry background. But if you were then to sprinkle salt on your tree, you'd just get the salt effect on the tree, and I really wanted the salt effect to be in the background and on the tree. So it's making life a little bit more complicated. This is not an easy technique and it's all down to practice. Now I'm keeping an eye on this paper here, and you can probably see it glistening. Now, if this is going to work, it's going to depend on the wetness of the paper and the thickness of your paint to get it just right. And it's not very often you can get it just right, so you have to live with the results. And we'll see what happens with this one when I drop the paint in. So I left this for 3 or 4 minutes, and then when I dropped the paint in, straight away I knew that the background was a little too wet for the thickness of the paint that I was putting in. You can see here that it is staying in place reasonably well. You don't want it to diffuse, but it was feathering too much for my liking. Can you see the feathering on there? So I knew the background was slightly too wet for the effect that I wanted. But going ahead, I sprinkle salt on. Again, it's up to you how much you want to put on, and it's down to practice. And you can see here, I've done a time lapse. This is 4 times the real speed of the drying. And it's really quite interesting, isn't it? You can see the effects of the salt. It's actually working quite well. It's you can see the salt effects in the background. The salt is soaking up the paint and leaving those white areas. And it's also working on the tree as well. It's working a little bit too well for my liking. I particularly wanted to try and keep the snowflakes, if you like, a little bit more distinct, but we're getting a bit of a blizzard. But this is what happens with watercolour, and as I was saying earlier, you've got to live with what you get. So we'll see later on how I put the trunks and the branches and the little fence on this, and it works out quite nice. I did do a second one, which I kept a little drier, so I'll show you that one next. So I did this one in the same way. I wet the paper, put about the same amount of water on the background there, just damped it, and then dropped in the colours. When you're doing this, don't worry about where you're putting these colours. There's no particular rhyme or reason. I put them where they were. Some of you may not have the light red. It's a lovely landscape colour. It makes nice mauves, and I would suggest that you get it. If you don't have it, for this particular exercise, if you liked the colours, you could try cadmium red light or a bit of cadmium red. Of course, this little picture, you can do any colours that you want. That's the beauty of it. You could spend a whole day just using different colours and making loads of little scenes like this. Perhaps ultramarine with the light red, or ultramarine with any red, cobalt with any red, if you wanted to sort of keep these pinky blues. Anyway, see what you come up with. And as you know, I do have a Facebook group where you can post your work. It'd be really interesting to see some of the colour combinations and some of the effects that you come up with. So do post them on there, and have a look in the description box to find out how to get there. So this was left 3 or 4 minutes, about the same time as the last one, but you can see it is behaving quite differently. I think the background is a little bit drier and the mix is a little bit lighter. I'm not getting that feathering that I was getting on the first one. I put on the salt, and again I've done a time lapse because I thought it was really quite interesting to see. This time lapse is not quite as dramatic as the first one. It's not going to give us the blizzard. It is going to give me more of the individual snowflakes, I think. I think this will be quite helpful for people who are struggling with the salt techniques, because it can be quite difficult. You've got to get so many things sort of, right, if you like. I think one thing to come out of this, and one thing I learned, was that if the salt is going to work, if you have got the conditions right for the salt to soak up the paint, then it should only take a few minutes for the effects to take place. If thing is happening after 3 or 4 minutes, then it's quite likely that everything was too dry. And also, when this process is finished, people will say, well, what do I do with the salt that's left? Generally, if it has worked, there's little salt left because it's all picked up the water and dissolved. When it's completely dry, and I would say well, at least an hour. Then just brush off any excess salt that's still on the paper. This is how it dried completely, and then I just suggested a little bit of the blue in the foreground for shadow. I used the dark neutral mix to paint the tree trunks and the branches on this little tree. As you can see, I loaded the brush well. This is the advantage of the rigger, it does hold an awful lot of paint, and you can get rid of a little bit, as you saw there on the tissue, if you wanted it to be thinner. It's all practice again using the rigger. I do have a video out that I made some time ago on the use of the rigger, if you'd like to check that out. I'll put you a link down below. I like to put a little bit of fence here below the tree. I think it is attractive looking, adds some interest, and also I think it serves to anchor the tree to the ground. I did make a little blob here that I found quite irritating. Just using a little bit of clean water to soften it straight away and a tissue, and I felt happy with that. The salt effects were working quite well in the end on this one, and I was quite pleased with it. It looked fairly similar to the one I did a few years ago. I preferred it in the larger aperture card because you could see more of the salt effects on it. You may have been wondering, or may not, I don't know, what happened to my blizzard card. Well, I treated it in the same way. I'm not quite sure why, but I used a little brush for part of this rather than the rigger. I felt I needed a bit of a sturdier trunk on it maybe. But what I'm doing here is I'm painting the trunk and the branches through it. If you've got some little spaces, some little bird holes in the tree, then that's a good place to suggest where the branches are sort of intertwining through the, it's not foliage actually, it's this tone, this sort of mid-tone, neutral tone is standing for the twigs on the tree, so it's not a green tree in the winter. I think that's what the best way to describe it, the colour. It's the twigs and all the little twigs massed together on the tree. Anyway, so what I'm doing here now then is I'm working the same way, and I'm anchoring the tree again with a little fence. Try not to put the fence too regular. It's a little broken down fence in the countryside, so don't make it too regular. I think what I do now is, I'm going to strengthen the trunk a little bit, and I'm going to strengthen some of the branches that are coming out from there. It's a common mistake, I make it myself, I did then, is to not give the top of the tree enough support with the trunk and the branches. Make those quite sturdy. This is a lesson in perseverance. It's always good to persevere with some of these salt effects. You might think they're not working and give up on them, but you start putting things like the trees in there and the details, then they can come together. I really like this one in the end. I like it as much as the other one, to be honest. Here it is in one of the aperture cards. I prefer it in the larger aperture card, and I've stuck on a Merry Christmas sticker. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Do practice with the salt effects. If you're having trouble with it, it's really worth it. You can get some lovely effects with it, not only for snow, but maybe in a forthcoming video I'll do some salt effects using a different subject, which would be quite nice. So if you do enjoy my channel, then please do subscribe so that you don't miss anything. It's completely free to subscribe, and you can give me a thumbs up as well. If you would like to visit my Facebook group, it would be great to see some of your pictures and paintings and everything that you've been doing on there. But for the time being, bye for now and happy painting.